Welcome back to the show for our last segment here today. I'm talking with Jack Hamilton, better known as Professor John Maxwell Hamilton. He's an esteemed journalism professor at Louisiana State University. Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for Clear Politics. You're listening to RCP Radio on SiriusXM or on our podcast, which we post on our website every day. Jack, thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here, Carl.
You had a piece that we ran on the front page on Wednesday, and it's a different kind of political commentary. You're writing as a Democrat, but as a person who sees both sides because you're trained in the world's greatest profession, journalism, and but you have a caution for both sides, for both the MAGA Republicans who are feeling triumphant, and for Democrats who are their reactions vary. But tell our viewers and listeners what you're trying to tell each side to do.
Well, I think there are really two messages. One is that the idea of reform can be good. And I think we need to embrace that concept. There's a difference, however, between reform and revolution. And I have a concern about a revolution and what the consequences of that will be. Second thing is I think we need to, and I write about this often in my columns, I think we need to try to always go back to principles. And principles means wanting to make the system work better and strengthening it rather than finding ways to tear it down, and also to respect the truth and fairness rather than your own side. So as an example, President Biden pardons his son, which I find appalling. It actually seriously bothers me. One of the arguments I hear Democrats make is, and they genuinely feel this way as well. Trump has very porous relationships between being president and his business interests. He's pardoned his own family members and so forth. Okay, so he has, but we can't have a spiral going down and down so that every time one side does something, the other side tries to match it. Why imitate the things you don't like? Why not rise above that? And being a liberal, and I'm pretty much a centrist Democrat on most issues, and sometimes slightly conservative, but being a liberal, I expect the people that I identify with to take the lead in doing that. And I would hope both sides would do that. And so that's my concern.
Jack, let me ask you a question, because I've noticed this since Donald Trump came on the scene in 2015, and that's been a while now. We're 9 years into this guy, and
Right.
I would tell you, I think it's the strangest or most unexpected thing I've encountered in my political career, which is that the people who profess to dislike Trump the most, who really hate him, who think he's a menace and a danger, and they're the people who act the most like him. They're willing to bend these norms. They're willing to exaggerate. He lies. They lie. He says something stupid. They mischaracterize it on purpose to make it sound even stupider. I don't what drives people to 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 not do what you're saying, not be a little more philosophical about what they're doing and trying to and adhere to their own principles.
So, especially in the last couple of weeks since the election, and also reading comments when I write columns for you, which I enjoy doing in large part because you put all sides on it. And for me, that's a point of saying to my liberal friends, hey, look, I write in places that I try to have multiple points of view. And I respect that. And I'm beginning to change my mind on some things in ways that I'm not happy about. And one is, I think, the number of people out there, not all, but the large number of people out there who actually think that chaos is better than what we have now. And I really believe that. Now, having been a combat Marine and having been a foreign correspondent in countries where I saw what wars look like, I'm appalled to think anyone would want that, to see places in utter chaos and their own families subjected to these kinds of problems. But there's two things about it, and history tells us something about this. The first is when people feel this way so strongly that they don't want to see the other side, it's a sign of how desperate they are. That, in other words, they feel that the system has nothing in it for them. And that's something the Democrats have to pay attention to. You can't just write people off because they are that way. I mean, you have to find out why they actually don't care and why they feel so strongly. The second thing that I remembered, thought about, is revolutions are always led by elites. And that's an interesting paradox with the Trump administration, or the Trump followers, because actually, if you match up leaders in the Trump administration with previous administrations, they're more elite than some of the people who were in the Democratic cabinet and so forth. I mean, they all went to elite colleges. They may now wear leather jackets and kind of look slovenly and walk around as if they look like they weren't at Harvard, but most of them went there. And so that's something I think that Trump followers really need to think about. Why is it that elites are asking to tear down a system that they benefited from and made fortunes from or fame? And I don't really have an answer to that question, but I think it's really worth pondering.
Well, I agree with you. But if elites are starting revolutions, and J.D. Vance went to Yale Law School, right? And Donald Trump himself went to Wharton School of Business. So these are not the proletariat, uh, from
No,
from Siberia
no.
trying to kill the czar. But there is something about the people who follow them, Jack. The Washington Post had a very interesting story about a year ago, and they looked into the background of the January 6th protesters and demonstrators, the rioters, people who invaded the Capitol. And they did a cross section of it. I think they looked at the people who'd been arrested, and a stunning percentage of them, between 25 and 50%, had financial hardship in their lives, that they risk losing their home. That kind of, and those people feel that the system isn't working for them. So yeah, Trump and JD Vance may have gone to Ivy League schools, but you got this movement of people, working class people, who think the system isn't working anymore. And I guess my question is, so the Washington Post did that story, they're to be credited for it, but then they kind of forgot about it. Their coverage doesn't reflect that. And I don't mean to single out that paper, because I like that paper and read it every day, but the political coverage tends to, treat Trump supporters like there's something wrong with them. And the point you make in your column is, well, there may be something wrong with them, but revolutions, you quote Mark Twain, a revolution exists because they're not getting something that they need out of government.
That's right. Yeah, I think there's this problem that appears in many places, that is that if you're not in favor of Trump, you begin to think that every one of the people who support him, there has to be something wrong with them. And that's not even statistically possible. I mean, are you saying half the country is crazy? I mean, half the country is just morally a deficit? That's not true. There are lots of very, very, very good people who support Trump. So then why is that? So here's an example. This is, this thing in being a foreign correspondent. If you talk to the cab driver, that's not a good way to be a reporter. Like on the way in from the airport, talk to the cab driver and then write a story. But sometimes individual episodes tell you something. And so a woman I know who is a housekeeper, who is Hispanic and has her papers and all the rest, she said many in her family supported Trump. Now, for people who are, have maybe been somewhat more charitable toward immigration and so forth, you can say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense because I've been supporting those people. I'm all in favor of immigration. But why do they feel that way? Well, they feel that way because they think that illegal immigrants have been treated too softly and they had to work their way up through the system. And so they resent it. Well, that's a much more complicated view of what's going on than merely writing people off as being ignoramuses. And so I don't do that. I do think that people who say boldly that they think chaos is great I feel very sorry for them and for my family and for all of us who will have to suffer if that really came to pass. But it's just not right to to oversimplify and reduce everything to some kind of caricature. And I think the press is so concerned about things that Trump does that are, I believe, inherently undemocratic and find very troubling, that it's hard for them to get past that.
Well, that's right. But the party that the party that run on preserving democracy probably shouldn't have tried to kick Trump off the ballot, probably shouldn't have turned a
Yeah,
single misdemeanor in New York into 34 felonies,
absolutely.
right? Shouldn't have done all these, should maybe not pardon your own son when you said many times you wouldn't. It,
Yeah.
I look, I'm like you, and I sometimes people who really read me carefully say I have a double standard, that I hold liberal Democrats to a higher standard. I may. I grew up in a house like that. And, those are my people. But if you're going to invoke these high-minded principles, any journalist should hold you to them. Um, you're listening to John Maxwell Hamilton, professor of journalism at LSU. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief. We've got about a minute left, Jack. I want to ask you um, one final question, though. This talk about this loose talk of revolution, tearing it down, blowing it up, what Kash Patel said about the FBI building and stuff. When commentators say that, or demonstrators, it's one thing. But when you have people who are going to come in and run the government saying it, I'm with you in that it's a little unsettling. And you wonder how much of this was just rhetoric to try and win an election, and how much they really want to have fundamental change. And, you know, look, they won the election, but they're gonna have a two-seat majority in the House. They're gonna win the popular vote for a plurality, not a majority. It was a very close election. And does it seem to you that they're already, even before the inauguration, over-interpreting their mandate?
I, you know, I'm not sure what their mandate is. I mean, is the mandate really for revolution? I mean, like, what percentage of people really feel that way? There are a lot of people who say, incredible numbers of people who say that they think violence is okay when your cause is right. And that is that revolution? I mean, it's still violence. So I don't know what the mandate is, and I don't know how many people. I sometimes wonder. I find it hard to believe. I can't believe when sometimes you can look at something like January 6th and make statements that it was just a Sunday picnic. I mean, I cannot get my mind around that. But I think things can fall apart, and I think the idea that somehow because we are the country we are, it always works out. I kind of look at it like, the Romans are sitting around and they go, somebody says, hey, these people are invading us. They go, no, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But then one day, guess what? The Huns arrive. And so someday it happens. And I don't mean to say that in such a jocular way, actually. You know, Sinclair Lewis wrote a book that is often mentioned these days. It's not a very good novel in terms of structure and so forth. But it was written out of fear about Huey Long and what would happen in the 1930s, and also what they were seeing with Mussolini and Hitler. And so this was a reaction to that. And his wife, Sinclair Lewis's wife, is a very famous foreign correspondent who had one of the first interviews with Hitler. And so, he was really feeling this. And I read that book recently, and it is very scary because it shows
Name of the novel?
it can't happen here.
That's right.
And it's a very interesting book because you can see how this can work. How one day somebody gets a job who has not had a good job or has not had, and now all of a sudden that person's in charge. And then that person starts overreaching and then does terrible things to people. But then that person had something terrible done to them because this kind of revolution just gets off the rail and eats its own. And I just wish people who thought about violence this way really understood what it means for them and their families. That's the part that I think is so important.
And I agree with you. You've been listening to Jack Hamilton, professor of journalism at LSU. And one of the reasons I'm optimistic about the future is that we still have educators like Dr. Hamilton. That's going to do it for us today. We'll be back tomorrow on Sirius XM, POTUS Channel 124. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief of Real Clear Politics. Have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.